How has housing inequality evolved in Durham? Which Duke employees make the most money? I'm Matthew Griffin, and we'll answer both of those questions on this episode of DukeWeek. But first, we'll hear from Drew Shindell, Nicholas Distinguished Professor of Earth Science. Shindell has been an author on multiple United Nations reports on climate change, and he was a reviewer on a new report released in August, which sounded another urgent warning about the dangers a warming planet poses to humanity. He was also at this month's COP26 Climate Summit, and he's here to talk about his work and the agreements nations reached at the summit to try to limit climate change. This summer's IPCC climate report was an alarm bell about the urgency of the climate crisis. What did the report find about the warming that we expect the planet to see and the effects that could have?
Well, one of my colleagues in the Nicholas School joked to me that the sixth assessment report would be the sixth wake-up call for people, even before it came out. And indeed, what it found was largely an extension of what the previous reports had found, that the planet is warming, that humans are responsible, and on our current trajectory, we're likely to go into dangerous territory where we really don't want to be. It did also point out how we have options still, and really our future is not going to be ideal, but it is still largely under our own control. And, if we can keep on our current trajectory, yes, things will get terrible. But if we do rapidly transition to a low carbon economy, then we can really make the damages from climate change much, much less. So we can't make them stop completely. It will continue to get worse rather than get better. But we can ameliorate the extent to which it gets worse hugely by taking action now.
So what have you been up to at the Glasgow Climate Conference this week?
Well, one of the things that the sixth assessment report pointed out to policymakers was that reducing methane was one of the key ways we could slow climate change as well as improve public health in the near term. And that came this past summer following a big report that I led in the spring that talked, again, in very great detail about how to reduce methane and what benefits that would bring to us. And so what I was doing in Glasgow was primarily supporting the launch of a new effort to, in fact, go ahead and reduce methane. And the US and the European Union led a push for a new global methane treaty or pledge, a voluntary agreement, really. And by the time of the Glasgow meeting, it listed over 100 countries. And we had a pavilion at Glasgow trying to present all of the benefits, how cost effective it was, how you also improve public health, and how this was really the strongest lever we had on warming in the next 30 years. And so to encourage more to join on and enhance this pledge, as well as, ensuring that the countries that have signed on know how to carry it out and fulfill their pledge.
As we speak, it's Friday morning in the US, Friday afternoon in Europe, and negotiators are trying to reach a final agreement to limit future emissions. We don't know exactly what's going to be in that, but as of this time, what other pledges have been made at the conference? What looks like it's going to be in that final climate deal? What can we expect to see?
What we have seen is that many of the nations of the world, especially the wealthier nations, have increased their long-term pledges. So if they actually fulfill everything they promised, including these long-term paths to net zero, we would keep warming probably below 2 degrees, which is a huge improvement over anywhere we've been before. But that really requires the whole world to actually meet their objectives, which again, they haven't been doing. In part, that does require some funding to go to developing countries to really get them on board and to get countries that are really suffering a lot of damages from climate change but didn't contribute to the problem to feel that they're being treated fairly. So I think we will, remains to be seen what major emitters like Russia and China, whose leaders didn't come to the meeting, what they will do, how much they will cooperate with the rest of the world. But there's a lot of positive momentum. We have the strongest pledges we've ever seen, still not enough, but stronger than anything we've got out of any of the previous COPs. And I think it's really quite encouraging so far.
After we spoke, nations reached a deal that calls on countries to strengthen their near-term climate goals, move faster to cut the use of fossil fuels, and help vulnerable nations adapt to the effects of climate change. According to the Washington Post, it won't be enough to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, a level beyond which the effects of a changing climate could become much worse. But officials say it's a step in the right direction. Housing inequality has a long history here in Durham. Features managing editor Katie Tan is here to talk about that history, from the Civil War to today's eviction crisis. So I want to start at the beginning with this story. You note that nearly 1/3 of people in Orange and Durham counties were enslaved at the start of the Civil War. So what happened when enslaved Black people became free and wanted to buy land?
So when enslaved Black people were finally declared free by the Emancipation Proclamation, they still didn't have any means to buy land. Even poor white people didn't have any means to buy land. And they just became sharecroppers and struggled to even buy any land because all of Durham's industrial elite owned the majority of the premium real estate.
And then later on, you write that the textile industry contributed to housing segregation in Durham. So how did that work?
Right. So after the Civil War, people were really looking for ways to create new economic opportunities to rebuild the South. And that's how Durham's textile industry rose to prominence. But the textile mills employed mostly white workers, and the people in charge of these mills built the white workers cheap subsidized housing. But this wasn't the case for Black workers. They mostly settled in neighborhoods by the names of Hickstown, Walltown, West End, East End, and Hayti was the largest area.
And then how did banks and legal restrictions later reinforce and contribute to housing segregation?
Yeah, so the main forms of this implicit sort of segregation were deed restrictions, zoning laws steering, real estate marketing, redlining, and public housing. For example, for a deed restriction, one deed restriction said no home should cost less than $7,500. So that made it impossible for working class people to afford the homes. And also Black people weren't allowed to live in the community except as domestic workers in this deed statement.
Wow. And then what was urban renewal? How did it tear apart Black communities?
Urban renewal was a movement all across the United States in 1950s. And its goal was to build interstate highways that connected cities to suburbs. So the federal government gave cities billions of dollars to tear down so-called blighted areas and replace them with affordable housing. So there was this realization that a lot of these areas were African American neighborhoods, including ones in Durham. And Durham's government was super eager to receive this large amounts of money. So they promised Black communities, new housing, new commercial development, and major infrastructure improvements. But in the end, there was a lot of money for tearing things down, but not a lot to build things back up. So, over 4,000 families and 500 businesses were displaced in the end, and these people really didn't have anywhere to go.
You write that Durham still faces housing challenges today. What are some of those?
The two main housing challenges that Durham faces today are gentrification and the eviction crisis. There's a lot of neighborhoods, especially historically Black neighborhoods, that are facing really rapid gentrification, and people just get pushed out because they can't afford to live there anymore. The median sale price for homes sold in Durham increased by over 50% between mid-2010 and October 2019, so that is quite a lot. For the eviction crisis, in late August, the Supreme Court declared that a Biden administration eviction moratorium was unconstitutional. So in that case, landlords have begun to evict tenants for not paying rent. A lot of tenants didn't have any means to pay rent due to unemployment from the pandemic. So all these people are just kind of getting kicked out and they don't have anywhere to live.
Ever wonder who gets the biggest payday at Duke? Or how much President Vincent Price makes? Well, tax documents reveal how much Duke's top administrators and athletics personnel made in the 2019 fiscal year, and staff reporter Adway Wadekar is here to break it down. So, who's making bank at Duke? Who's on that list of people making more than $1 million a year?
Right. So there are 12 people at Duke that are making above $1 million a year. That includes Coach K, David Cutcliffe, the football coach, the former athletic director, Kevin White, and the former women's basketball coach, Joanne McCallie. Also on the administrative side, Neil Triplett, the CEO of DukeWeek, the Chancellor of Health Affairs, President Price is making over $1 million, and so are Evan Jones, Justin Nixon, and Ralph Snyderman, who is the Chancellor Emeritus of Health Affairs.
How much does President Price get paid to run the school?
Yeah, President Price gets paid $1.5 million, $1,519,000. All of that is either in base compensation, retirement. He does not earn any bonus.
And who makes more than Price? I think no one's going to be surprised to see Coach K on that list, but who else is on the list of people making more than the president, and how much do they all make?
Yes, Coach K obviously is on that list, as are the rest of the athletic staff who appear on the 990 tax form. But two people make more on the administrative side of things. So Neil Triplett, who's the chief investment officer at Duke, makes about $3 million, and Chancellor of Health Affairs makes a little over $2.5 million.
What about Coach K? How much is he getting paid?
Coach K makes close to $7.5 million.
That's the most of anyone, right?
That is the most of anybody, yes.
In other news, Duke men's basketball won its first 3 games of the season against Kentucky, Army, and Campbell. Duke has released final Quad X pairings for East and West Campus dorms. You can find the list on our website, dukechronicle.com. And we've ranked every grilled cheese sandwich on West Campus. So make sure to check out that story on our website as well, because I know you wouldn't want to miss the best cheesy goodness campus has to offer. That's all for this episode of Duke Week. If you like what we're doing, subscribe. Our music is Goji Berry Beat by Nano Colbina. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk again next week.